Did God write the book? Did God inspire the book and human beings wrote it? Did God show human beings events that they then described in their own words? Okay, so the reason these things are important is it seems to me, to answer the question I raised earlier about in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, the way I understand it is there's a perfect revelation shown to a gospel, to a Bible, to a Jewish scribe who sees it, so to speak, but writes it in his own words. When I look at the book of Revelation, same thing.
And does it get anything wrong? Do those scribes get anything wrong?
It's quite possible that they, when you say get anything wrong, they are writing it in human terms. I mean, you know...
But I mean the specifically mundane human things. I'm not talking about when the author of Genesis says that God created the heavens of the earth, or talks about the Spirit moving across the face of the water. This is clearly mythological. This is clearly an attempt at mythological writing. That's fine. It would be silly to ask if that's true or not. But when somebody...
I don't think it is mythological writing at all. I think that it is simply... I mean, put it this way. If we were in the year 4000 BC, if we were John the Divine, and let's just say that God showed us in a vision the actual end of the world, right? Sure. Apocalypse. We would then write down the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, death and famine and destruction. We're not engaging in myth-making at all. I'm actually writing what I see.
So you think there'll be a 7-headed demon?
Of course not. I'm saying that to me, what I'm seeing is so, let's just say, for example, it is a thermonuclear explosion
Sure.
of a kind that the ancient Bible writer doesn't even know what it is,
yeah.
Right? And the consequence of it is death and destruction and famine. He's going to write it down the way he sees it.
But
right?
Where's he going to get the 7-headed dragon and the prostitute from?
This is his
like a human attempt to describe a nuclear reaction?
Yes, because when words and images fail, metaphor is the actual conduit to truth.
Now, I'd understand if that were the case, if you said that perhaps after a nuclear blast, somebody describes it as, the gods of fire descending upon man with their flaming swords or something like that. But like a prostitute and a 7-headed dragon?
Well, first of all, I'm not saying it is a nuclear explosion. The problem is we're given this admittedly phantasmagorical future account, right?
Sure.
It is so wrenching and powerful that many people, for example, have tried to render it by art.
Yep.
And it's not easy to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy to do it because we have to stop and realize, first of all, that we're dealing not only with the limitations of perception, but the limitations of language. Let me give you a simple example. I come to America from India. I have never eaten a mushroom. Okay? I ask you, Alex, what does a mushroom taste like?
Sure.
I would submit that you would be completely unable to render to me in words, however lengthy and ornate, what a mushroom actually tastes like.
That may be true, but I was asking, for example, about Jesus' presentation at the Temple of Jerusalem after his birth. This is not like trying to describe a mushroom or the end of the world.
No. Okay, so now let's talk about that.
Hold on a second. This is a historical event that's being recorded by one New Testament writer at the same time as another New Testament writer says that the family had traveled to Egypt. I don't think this is an attempt at metaphor or allegory, as I would say of Genesis. Whether you think that is or not, I would say that in the case of the Gospels, we can agree that on at least some instances, this is a clear attempt at mundane history. This is not an attempt at writing some kind of metaphor to explain a truth that's otherwise unknowable to the human mind. It's a very straightforward attempt to record what actually happened, and they contradict each other.
They contradict each other because they're written by 4 different people.
Sure. May also purchase some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan born in your town. You can bequeath them to your children as inheritable property. This is human beings, by the way. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So not only do we have, the description of slavery in the Old Testament, we have an explicit condoning instructions on how to do it and doing it based on race.
Well, I wouldn't say based on race because...
How else do you interpret...
First of all, racism is an invention of the modern
world.
Tribe.
Call it tribe if you like.
Right.
Ethnicity.
These are clans.
You treat,
these
you
are
treat
militaristic
Israelite
clans.
slaves this way, and you treat non-Israelite slaves this way. By the way that the Israelite slaves are treated, we're told in Exodus 21, if you have a male slave, they're to go free after 7 years. But if you give them a wife and they have children while they're your property, then they don't go free after 7 years, only the man does. And Exodus 21 says, but if the man decides that he loves his wife and his children and his master and wants to stay, then he can say to his master he wants to stay, at which point he's taken outside, his ear is pierced like cattle, and he becomes a slave for life. Now, by the way, female slaves aren't let go after 7 years at all in the first place. Now, I understand what you're saying when you say, when you say, like, okay, maybe God couldn't have abolished slavery for some reason, but at least, for example, when the male slave goes free, let his wife and children go with him.
Yeah.
Why not this simple moral improvement? There is no conceivable reason that this could not have been ordained by God, but
Look,
it was not.
You have a capital argument here to be had with the rabbis, and look, there is a massive rabbinical tradition that discusses
Dinesh,
every
you're
fine
here
point,
to
as you
convince
know.
these people that the Bible is true.
But it's not my job to
I'm not a rabbi either.
isolate the Old Testament from the New and justify ancient battles that have no bearing. Let me put it this way:
And tell me how
if someone
specifically the New
were to
Testament
listen to
undoes
you,
this.
they would have no idea that the first anti-slavery movement in the world is driven by the Quakers and the evangelical Christians. They read the same Bible, but evidently they don't read it your way, because if they read it your way, they would be the prime apologists and defenders of slavery. So
Dinesh.
you have to explain why you take a universal institution.
Dinesh, when did that happen?
In every culture.
When did that happen?
When did what happen?
When did that movement first get off the ground?
It's in America, it starts shortly after the Quakers get here. So the early let's put it this way, the early anti-slavery movements are about 1710,
So
1720.
Here's two hypotheses then. One hypothesis is that God actually didn't like slavery the whole time. It just took human beings literally thousands of years to work it out, and that just so happened to coincide with the Enlightenment. That's one hypothesis. Another hypothesis is actually that the Bible does condone slavery, and that what's going on is, I think, for example, when you look at the actual verses that are being given as justification for the Christian abolitionist movement, what kind of verses are we talking about?
Well, what I'm saying is that first of all, the Enlightenment...
It may have been Christians who did it, but they weren't, to say that they were doing it as motivated by Christianity is a different kind of claim.
It is a very significant claim because to you, the Bible exists in an interpretive tradition that has been expostulated over many centuries by Christians. They're reading that Bible. They're reading it with great care as to what it's trying to say. And the Enlightenment, far from being the origin of any of this, in fact, the racism that came out of the Enlightenment was of a species that never existed before. I mean, you think of the great philosophers like Hegel, Kant, their denunciations of blacks, for example, you'll find nothing like that in the Old Testament, leave alone the New. You and I are not going to be in a position to go back and see whether or not Jesus raised a man from the dead,
well,
right?
It's not all you say. It's not all you're saying.
The Christian is perfectly willing to take that on faith.
You think that did happen, and you're taking it on faith, and that's fine.
Yes.
More power to you. And in fact, I envy your ability to believe things despite what
Well,
seems
don't
to me
you
like
take a lot of things on faith?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Plenty of things on
Yeah,
faith.
well, yeah, all the time.
So all the
time.
things that you take on faith
Yeah.
are things that you think are not unreasonable, but the things that Christians take on faith are to you unreasonable because they can't be corroborated with historical evidence.
Is that what I said? I don't remember saying that.
So are the Christian beliefs on faith just as reasonable as everything that you believe on
It
faith?
can be, depending on the reasons, but the veracity of the gospel accounts and the Old Testament prophecy, I think, is unreasonable to believe in. Not life after death, that's fine, you can believe that. Not like, a man called Jesus rose from the dead, fine. But the idea that the Bible comports with reality either in mythological sense, in an allegorical sense, in a moral sense, or in the sense of historicity.
Let's talk about the moral sense, since you raised it, and we'll just talk about it briefly.
I want to make sure we've got time for Q&A, but look, I can reread the text if you like. The Amalekites...
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites, in part because here's the problem. For most Christians, the Old Testament is different than the new and is seen through the light of the new. So
But the
I'm
God-
not.
the
You,
God
if
is
you
the
want to,
same.
if you want to go to, Dennis Prager, who has written about this from a Jewish perspective, has written about the Deuteronomy, the Book of Kings, the Amalekites.
Sure, we can bring him out
what he
later,
considers
but-
to be the justifiable massacre of the Canaanites. I don't really want to go there because.
Well, I know why you don't want to go there.
Well,
because
the
it's
reason I don't want to go
unjustifiable.
there, the Old Testament is full of horrific massacres.
Yes, and
that is hold on.
Massacres which are ordained. by God.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
Sure.
Agreed. And
Well,
which
why
are
are you
which
saying
are,
Yahweh instead of God? Why are you sort of
because
trying to distance yourself from the God of the Old Testament?
well, I'm not trying to distance myself. I'm simply trying to say that any reader.
So why is that the first time you've used the word Yahweh in this conversation?
I'll tell you why. Because there is a movement within the Bible itself that you are completely missing.
Do not think that I have come
Hold
to
on, hold on,
abolish
hold
the
on.
law
Let me-
or the
let me-
prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount, referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and law.
Referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
Old
Look,
Testament law. And what I'm referring to here is an Old Testament law, which you're now trying to distance yourself
No,
from and say that it's sort of
I'm
different to the
saying-
New
I'm
Testament.
saying that you're
That's not what Jesus thought.
if God were writing it, I'm quite sure he would have written it once. He would need 4.
Sure, so,
okay?
so some of them are wrong then.
No. Okay, so when you say they're wrong, let's consider Luke's gospel for a minute.
Yep.
Luke is a medical doctor. Luke is not present at the events being described.
Mm-hmm.
Luke is virtually in the position of Thucydides writing the Peloponnesian War. Now, Thucydides did fight in the war, but in most of the events described by Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War, he wasn't there.
Making them very unreliable, right?
No, on the contrary. It is, in fact, the most reliable account of the Peloponnesian War that
That's not to say
historians
that it
have.
is. That's not to say that it is reliable, though.
No, it is. What I'm trying to say is that when you're talking about historicity, and you're talking about historicity now in the ancient world, you have to recognize that these people are not approaching it as modern historians. Luke is going around interviewing people.
So let me ask this very, very straightforwardly then.
Okay.
Luke says that after the birth of Jesus, the family fled to Egypt. Matthew says that they went to the Jerusalem temple. Are they both correct, or is one of them wrong?
Who the heck cares? I mean, look.
Well, I do, and so
well,
do
you
probably
do,
the
but,
people who
but,
are
but
listening
let me
to a debate
let me
about
say
whether the
let me
Bible
say
is
why
true.
let me say why what you care about is not only trivial, but indicates a kind of unwillingness to try to get what the text is trying to
I'll
communicate.
tell you why I don't think it's trivial.
Why
Because
is
I
it
think
not
that the
trivial?
reason why Luke may have invented the flight to Egypt, he tells us. Luke says, when he records the flight to Egypt, and then they return from Egypt, he says, this is so that we can fulfill the prophecy from Hosea chapter 11, out of Egypt I shall call my son. Now, in Hosea, God is talking here about the nation of Israel. At least in this case, unlike the Matthew prophecy, the prophecy actually exists and we can interrogate it. It seems to me like what Luke is doing here is attempting to display Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. And in fact, he tells us that that's what he's doing. Therefore, if it is the case that Jesus didn't go to Egypt and didn't come out of Egypt on his return, then this would undermine Luke's attempts to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. That's why I think it is relevant
Well, look.
and not trivial.
Right, but I think that
Would you agree with that? I mean, do you think it's a completely trivial point? If it's so trivial,
no,
then
I think that the point
then why
as
is it included in the first
point
place?
as you stated it before is trivial. The point you're now raising is not trivial, but the point you're now raising is one in which you have 3 centuries of Jewish Christian disputation about whether Jesus is the Messiah, okay? And by and large, the disputation breaks down in this way. The Jews are the biblical literalists, and the Christians are the sort of metaphorical readers. And I say this because let's take a very famous passage that bears on this very topic, where Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. And the Jews go, you said the temple would be destroyed. Now, interestingly, Jesus did say the temple would be destroyed, and the temple was in fact destroyed in 70 AD. In fact, 40 years after Jesus said that, the temple was in fact physically razed to the ground and the Jews dispersed in a huge diaspora. But my point is, Jesus doesn't reply that. Jesus doesn't say, hey, listen, wait 40 years. Jesus says, no, you're misreading me completely. When I said the temple, I was actually speaking of the temple of my body.
He doesn't tell them that.
But this is stated.
But we're told that that's what he means.
We're told that's what he means. So what I'm getting at is, here you have a case where you have an event, you have a Jewish literalist reading and a Christian metaphorical reading.
Yep.
Another example, and you know.
So would you say then the flight to Egypt is a metaphor? Is that what you're trying to say?
I'm saying you're missing the developmental track of the Bible that is obvious to any intelligent reader. Let me give you one example of what I'm talking about.
Tell me about the Amalekites. Tell me what the developmental
It's not about the Amalekites. It's about the way that the whole story of the Bible changes in tone and mood and message. For example,
help me out here. Like, just tell me where, any way you like. Tell me where this fits into that trajectory.
Okay, I'll tell you where.
We have just a couple minutes, guys, so let's wrap it up before the Q&A.
Just tell me.
The underlying message of the Old Testament is an eye for an eye. The Amalekites are the enemies of the Israelites. The Israelites will crush them with the same venom that the Amalekites would have crushed the Israelites. That's called an eye for an eye.
Including
now,
the children,
hold on.
The children, the infants,
the
cattle,
infants,
the sheep, the camels, the donkeys.
Yeah, that Dennis Prager says yes, but my point is different. You will not find that spirit at all in the New Testament. In fact, in the New Testament, you've got a spirit of forgiveness. So what I'm getting at is to pretend like you don't have this. Christianity is named after Christ. It's based on Christ as a fulfillment of the Old Testament. But what does fulfillment mean? It actually means transcendence. In Abraham's time, blood sacrifices are normal, right? When Christ comes as a sacrifice, Christ is the lamb. The point is, those blood sacrifices aren't necessary anymore.
Listen,
That's the Christian reading. And you keep filibustering me because you know that the Bible is showing a movement in a direction, and to miss the movement is to miss the Bible. Let's look at God in the Bible. Let me make one quick point about God in the Bible.
There's nothing quick about what you're doing, Dinesh. There's nothing quick about what you're doing. I need to be allowed to respond to what you're saying. I'm getting sick whenever I have these conversations.
You're cross-examining me on the justice of smiting the Amalekites. Honestly, I don't see any justice in it, but I do agree that was the eye for an eye ethic of the Old Testament that is repudiated and transformed and transfigured in the New.
I've had this conversation so many times, most recently with William Lane Craig. At least he had the gall to just tell me that yes, that was a moral thing for God to do. I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide by some vague reference to the fact that Jesus came along to do something which somehow kind of undoes the immorality of it. Like, this is not an eye for an eye. This is a genocide of combatant men, innocent women, and children, and animals. Saul is punished by God for not killing all of the animals. Like,
that is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening.